The year was 2847, and humanity had finally found its place among the stars. After hundreds of years of hard work and exploration, the children of Earth had built homes on 17 different worlds. They had made friends with the Galactic Confederation. It's a group of 43 alien species that had lived in peace for over 10,000 years. Humans were the newest members of this great family of stars. Commander Daniel Price stood alone on the observation deck of his starship, the Endurance. He was a tall man in his early 50s with dark hair that was turning gray at the sides. His face showed the lines and marks of a life spent traveling through the endless darkness between worlds. He watched the swirling blue clouds of a distant nebula that marked the edge of Confederation space. Something felt wrong to him, though he could not say exactly what it was. Lieutenant Maria Santos walked up behind him carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. She was his second in command and had served with him for 15 years. She knew him well enough to see the worry on his face. "You look troubled, Commander," she said softly. Handing him one of the cups, Daniel took the coffee and held it in both hands, feeling its warmth. "The Velari delegation was supposed to meet us 3 days ago. They've never been late. Not once in 200 years of contact with humans. The Velari were special among all the alien species. They had started the Confederation thousands of years ago. They were wise and old and had helped many younger species find their way to the stars. If they were late, something was very wrong." Before Maria could say anything, the door to the observation deck burst open. Ensign Kevin Park, the young officer who handled communications, ran in. His face was white as paper, and his eyes were wide with fear. Daniel had seen many things in his long career, but he had rarely seen such terror on a man's face. "Commander," Kevin said, his voice shaking, "we are receiving a distress signal. It is on every frequency. Every single one. It is being sent to the entire Confederation." Daniel felt a cold feeling spread through his chest. "Show me." The holographic display in the center of the deck flickered to life. What appeared on it was not the calm and peaceful face of a Velari ambassador. Instead, it showed a nightmare. A creature filled the screen, a thing made of moving darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. Behind this creature, a beautiful Velari city was burning. Towers that had stood for 1,000 years were crumbling to dust. A voice came through the speakers, broken and full of despair. It was being translated by the ship's computers. They came from the void between spaces. "The Kethril. We thought they were gone forever. We thought they were just old stories. We were wrong. They have returned. To all who hear this message, run. Run as fast as you can. The Kethril will not stop until every living thing in the galaxy is dead." The transmission ended and the display went dark. Maria's hand moved to the weapon at her side, without her even thinking about it. "What do we do?" she asked. Daniel set down his coffee cup. His jaw was tight and his eyes were hard. "We do not run. We find out what we are dealing with. Then we figure out how to fight it." Within a few hours, the Endurance had met up with what was left of the Velari fleet. Out of 10,000 mighty warships, only 12 remained. The survivors looked broken and lost. They told a story that seemed impossible to believe. The Kethril were not like other aliens. They were older than the galaxy itself. They were hunters from the space between dimensions, creatures that existed partly in this universe and partly somewhere else. Long ago, the first species to travel among the stars had sealed them away behind a barrier between worlds. For millions of years, that barrier had held strong. Now it had broken. Ambassador Veltus was one of the few Velari leaders who had survived. He came aboard the Endurance to speak with the humans. His body glowed with a soft light, but that light was dim now, flickering with exhaustion and grief. He had lost his family, his friends, his entire world. "We have studied the Kethril attacks," Velthus explained to the gathered humans. His voice was tired but steady. "They are careful and organized. They eat worlds in order, starting with the most advanced species. They take the knowledge and power of each civilization they destroy. At the speed they are moving, they will reach your homeworld, the planet you call Earth. In about 18 of your months, then we have 18 months to get ready," Danelle said firmly. Velthus looked at him with eyes that held thousands of years of wisdom and sorrow. Commander Price, I do not think you understand. The Cathrel cannot be hurt by normal weapons. They exist partly outside our reality. Our strongest weapons pass right through them like they are made of smoke. In 10,000 years, we never found a way to stop them because we believed they were gone forever. We never thought we would need to fight them. Daniel stood straight and tall. He looked at the ancient alien without fear. With respect, Ambassador, humans did not survive this long by giving up when things looked impossible. We will find a way. We always do. Velthus studied the human commander for a long moment. In all his years, he had met many species. Some were wise. Some were strong. Some were quick to think and others were brave in battle. But he had never met a species quite like these humans. There was something in their eyes, something that refused to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. Perhaps, Velthus said slowly, perhaps you will surprise us all. That night, Daniel stood alone once more on the observation deck. The stars shone cold and distant through the viewport. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between those stars, the Cathrel were coming. They had destroyed civilizations that were ancient when humans were still living in caves. They had eaten entire worlds and grown fat on the screams of billions. But Daniel Price was not afraid. He was worried, yes. He was concerned for his crew, for his species, for all the innocent people who would suffer in the days ahead. But fear was something else entirely. Fear was not something he had time for. He thought about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests he had not seen in years. He thought about the children playing in parks, the families sharing meals together, the old people watching sunsets from their porches. All of them were counting on people like him, even if they did not know it yet. We will find a way, he whispered to the stars. We have to. Behind him, the door opened and Maria stepped in. She did not say anything. She just stood beside him and watched the stars. They had been through many battles together, faced many dangers. But both of them knew that everything before had been practice. The real test was coming, and when it came, humanity would be ready. The news of the Cathrel invasion spread across human space faster than any ship could travel. Within days, every person on every colony world knew what was coming. Some people panicked and tried to run, though there was nowhere to run to. Some people fell to their knees and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. But in laboratories and research centers across 17 worlds, the smartest people humanity had ever produced began the most important work of their lives. Dr. Catherine was 63 years old. She had spent her entire career studying things that most scientists thought were a waste of time. She looked at the spaces between dimensions, the strange places where the rules of normal physics did not apply. Her colleagues had called her work interesting but useless. Nobody thought it would ever matter in the real world. Now, her useless research might be the only thing that could save the human race. She stood before the United Earth Defense Council in the old city of Geneva. The room was full of generals and admirals and politicians, all of them looking at her with desperate hope in their eyes. Behind her, a holographic display showed her findings. The Cathrel exist in two places at once, Catherine explained. Her voice was calm and clear, the voice of a teacher who had explained difficult things many times before. Part of them is in our universe, and part of them is somewhere else. That is why our weapons do not hurt them. The bullets and missiles pass through the part that is not really here. Admiral George Patterson leaned forward in his chair. He was the head of all Earth's military forces, a large man with a shaved head and sharp eyes. Can we change that? Can we make them solid? Catherine nodded. My research shows that certain energy frequencies can force them to become fully real. We can push them completely into our universe. Once they are solid, once they are truly here, they can be killed like anything else. The room buzzed with excited whispers. For the first time since the news of the invasion, there was hope. But there is a problem, Catherine continued, and the room went quiet again. The energy needed to create these frequencies is enormous. We would need to build entirely new power systems. We would need to design new weapons that have never existed before, and we would need to do all of this faster than anything has ever been built in human history. Admiral Patterson did not hesitate. Tell us what you need, Dr. Bell. Whatever it is, you will have it. What followed was something that had never happened before in all of human history. The entire species came together with a single purpose. Factories that had made toys and clothes and fancy gadgets stopped making those things and started building weapons instead. Universities became research centers where students and teachers worked side by side through the night. Regular people,
who had never held a gun in their lives, volunteered for military training, knowing they might have to defend their homes with their own hands. Commander Daniel Price was promoted to admiral and put in charge of the new resistance fleet. He worked every day with Maria Santos, who was now captain of the Endurance. Together, they developed new ways to fight an enemy that had never been beaten before. 6 months passed. During that time, the owl consumed another 12 species from the Confederation. Entire civilizations that had existed for thousands of years vanished in days. Planets that had been full of life became empty balls of rock floating in the cold darkness. Then came the worst news of all. The Fel, the oldest species in the galaxy, was nearly wiped out. Their beautiful cities, their great libraries full of knowledge collected over millions of years, their gardens and temples and monuments, all of it was gone in a single night of horror. Ambassador Haz was aboard a human ship when it happened. He felt the screams of his people through the mental connection all shared. For 3 days he sat alone in his quarters, not eating, not sleeping, just sitting in the darkness with his grief. When he finally came out, he looked older somehow, though did not age the way humans did. He found Admiral Price on the bridge of the new flagship, a massive carrier called the Unconquerable. "Your species is our last hope," Haz said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "All the other great civilizations have fallen. Only humanity remains. Do not let our sacrifice be without meaning." Daniel put his hand on the ambassador's shoulder. It was a human gesture of comfort, and he was not sure if Haz would understand it. But the ancient alien seemed to appreciate it anyway. "We will make them pay for what they have done," Daniel promised. "I swear it." 3 months later, the first prototype weapons were ready for testing. Dr. Bell watched from a protected bunker on Mars as a small owl scout was lured into a trap. The creature was about the size of a bus, a mass of writhing shadows that seemed to drink in all the light around it. Human ships surrounded it in a careful formation. His heart was pounding. Everything depended on this moment. If the weapons worked, humanity had a chance. If they failed, there was nothing left to try. "Fire," she ordered. The frequency cannon sent invisible waves of energy washing over the owl scout. For 1 terrible second, nothing happened. Felt her hope starting to die. Then the creature began to scream. It was not a sound that existed in the air. It was a scream that somehow appeared directly inside the minds of everyone watching. The shadow creature twisted and writhed, and slowly, impossibly, it began to become solid. The darkness turned into something almost like flesh. A regular missile struck it, and the creature exploded into 1,000 pieces. The bunker erupted in cheers. Scientists who had worked without sleep for months hugged each other and cried with joy. Allowed herself a small smile, but only for a moment. "That was one small scout," she reminded them. "We need to be ready to fight millions of them." Her assistant, a young man named Grant, stepped up beside her. He had been with her since the beginning, working harder than anyone to make this moment possible. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but they were shining with determination. "We will be ready," said. "We have to be." The months of preparation continued. More weapons were built. More ships were constructed. More soldiers were trained. Across human space, people worked and sacrificed and pushed themselves beyond what they thought possible. And through it all, the owl kept coming, moving closer and closer to Earth. They did not know that the humans were preparing for them. They did not know that this young species had found a way to hurt them. They expected easy prey, just like all the others. They were about to learn that humans were different. The owl arrived at the edge of human space on March 15, 2849. They came like a wave of darkness rolling across the ocean of stars. Long-range sensors tried to count them, but the numbers were almost too large to understand. There were billions of them, from small scouts the size of cars to massive creatures bigger than mountains. When they moved together, they blocked out the light of the stars behind them. Admiral Daniel Price stood on the bridge of the Unconquerable and watched them come. Around his flagship, 3,000 human warships waited in formation. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever put together. Every ship that could fly, every weapon that could fire, every pilot who could fight was here. Behind them lay Earth and the 16 colony worlds, home to 12 billion people who were counting on them. Captain Maria Santos stood at the tactical station, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. "All ships report ready, Admiral," she said. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. Daniel nodded and opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. His voice would reach every ship, every station, every colony in human space. He had thought about what to say for days, but now that the moment had come, the words seemed to find themselves. "This is Admiral Price," he began. "By now, you all know what we are facing. The AL have destroyed civilizations that were old when our ancestors were still learning to make fire. Every species they have ever met has been wiped out." He paused, letting those words settle in. "But there is something the AL do not know about humans. We are stubborn. When someone tells us something is impossible, we find a way to do it anyway. When our backs are against the wall, we fight harder than anyone thinks we can. Today, we are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for every species that fell before us. We are fighting for every species that might come after us. Today, we hold the line." The AL attacked without warning. Their leading creatures crashed against the human fleet like a dark wave hitting a wall of stone. The battle that followed was the largest in the history of the galaxy. The frequency cannons fired in perfect coordination. Waves of energy washed over the enemy, forcing them to become solid. When they did, the missiles were waiting. Explosions lit up the darkness of space like 1,000 suns being born at once. Fighter ships flew through the chaos, their pilots pushing themselves to the limit and beyond. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell led one squadron of fighters through the heart of the battle. Before the invasion, she had been a simple cargo pilot, flying supplies between Earth and Mars. She had lived a quiet life and never expected to be a warrior. But when her world needed her, she had answered the call. Now she had destroyed more AL than almost any other pilot in the fleet. "All right, Razor Squadron," she called out to her. "Stay close together. Watch each other's backs. We take care of our own." Her fighters danced through the AL formations with impossible grace. The neural enhancement systems in their helmets let them react faster than any normal human could. They saw patterns in the chaos that others missed. Suddenly, something massive emerged from the swarm. It was an AL creature the size of a small moon, its body shifting and pulsing with dark energy. The regular frequency cannons could barely affect something so huge. "I have an idea," Sarah said to her squadron. "Follow me and do exactly what I do." She dove straight toward the giant creature. It was insane, suicidal, the kind of thing that should have gotten her killed. But Sarah had learned something in all her battles with the AL. They expected their enemies to be afraid. They did not expect someone to attack them head-on. The creature reached for her with tendrils of darkness, but Sarah was faster. She flew through gaps that should not have existed, seeing the movements before they happened. "Now," she screamed. All the fighters in her squadron fired at once. Their concentrated energy beams hit the creature's center. For just a moment, the monster became solid, and the big guns on the Unconquerable had a clear shot. The explosion was so bright that people on Earth could see it with their bare eyes. But for every victory, there was a price to pay. Ships were caught by the AL and dragged into darkness. Entire crews disappeared, consumed by an enemy that ate everything it touched. Admiral Price watched the numbers on his display and saw his fleet getting smaller even as they killed millions of the enemy. "Admiral," Maria said quietly, her voice heavy, "we have lost the outer defensive line. They are breaking through." Daniel closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought of his crew, of all the brave men and women who were dying out there in the darkness. He thought of the people back on Earth who were watching the battle on their screens and praying for a miracle. Then he opened his eyes with new determination. "We fall back to the secondary line. We keep fighting. We keep killing them. We fight until there is nothing left to fight with." The battle raged on. Human ships formed new formations and continued to pour fire into the owl swarm. Pilots who had been flying for 20 hours straight refused to rest. Engineers who had fixed the same systems a dozen times fixed them again. Medics worked on wounded soldiers and then picked up weapons and fought alongside them. Sarah Mitchell and what remained of her squadron flew mission after mission. She lost count of how many owls she destroyed. She lost count of how many friends she saw die. But she kept flying, kept fighting, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant everyone she loved would die. As the battle entered its second day, something strange began to happen. The owl, who had never known defeat, started to slow down. They had expected the humans to break and run like every other species. Instead, these strange, soft creatures kept coming at them, kept hurting them, kept refusing to die. For the first time in millions of years, the owl felt something they had almost forgotten. They felt doubt. But they were still winning. Slowly, steadily, they pushed closer to Earth. The human fleet was running out of ships, out of missiles, out of time. Admiral Price knew that courage alone would not be enough. They needed something more. They needed a miracle. The battle had been going on for 72 hours without stopping. 3 days and 3 nights of constant fighting, constant dying, constant struggle against an enemy that seemed to have no end. Human crews worked in shifts, sleeping for a few hours and then returning to fight again. The medical bays on every ship were overflowing with wounded soldiers. Doctors and nurses worked until they collapsed from exhaustion and then got up and worked some more. Dr. Bell had not slept in days. She was aboard a research ship behind the main battle lines, surrounded by screens showing data from the fighting. Every time an owl died, every time a weapon fired, the information came to her. She studied it all, looking for patterns, looking for weaknesses, looking for anything that might help. By the end of the 3rd day, the human fleet had lost half its ships. 1,500 vessels destroyed, millions of brave souls gone forever. The owl had also suffered terrible losses, but their numbers still seemed endless. They had pushed past Saturn and were heading toward the inner planets. At this rate, they would reach Earth in less than a week. Admiral Daniel Price stood over the tactical display on the bridge of the Unconquerable. He had not slept either. His uniform was wrinkled and his eyes were red, but his mind was still sharp. He watched the battle unfold in miniature on the holographic screen and saw what he had been afraid to admit. "We cannot win like this," he said to Maria, who stood beside him. "There are too many of them." Maria nodded. Her own face showed the same exhaustion, the same pain. "What do we do? There must be something." Before Daniel could answer, a communication came through from Dr. Bell's research ship. His face appeared on the screen. She looked terrible, her gray hair messy and dark circles under her eyes, but there was excitement in her voice. "Admiral, I think I have found something," she said quickly. "The owl are not just a random swarm. They are connected somehow, like bees in a hive. They share one mind, one consciousness, and I have located what looks like the center of that mind. A queen, or maybe a brain. One massive creature at the heart of their formation." Daniel leaned forward. "What does that mean for us?" "If we can destroy the central creature, the whole swarm might collapse. Without the queen to guide them, the rest might fall apart." Hope flickered in Daniel's chest, small but real. "Where is this queen?" "At the very center of their formation. It is huge, Admiral, bigger than anything we have ever seen. and it is surrounded by millions of protectors. Daniel studied the tactical display, tracing a path from the human fleet to where the Owl Queen was hiding. Any ship that tried to reach it would have to fly through the entire enemy swarm. It was impossible. It was suicide. Unless someone created a very big distraction. "Get me Ambassador Has," Daniel ordered. The ancient appeared on the screen moments later. He had been helping coordinate communications between human ships, using his species' telepathic abilities to pass messages faster than any radio could. He looked tired, but he was still standing, still fighting alongside the humans who had become his last hope. "Admiral Price," Has said, "I have been watching the battle. Your species fights with incredible courage. Ambassador, I need your help. I need to know everything about how the ancient species sealed the owl away before. Everything." Has was silent for a long moment. His glowing eyes seemed to look at something far away, something only he could see. Finally, he spoke. "There is an old technique, passed down through our oldest records. It requires a living mind to create what we call a dimensional anchor. The anchor can be used to drag the owl fully into our universe, to make them completely solid. But the person who creates the anchor must connect their mind directly to the owl consciousness. What happens to that person? The mental strain would be fatal. Their mind would be destroyed. But in that moment of connection, the Owl Queen would be completely vulnerable." Daniel felt the weight of those words press down on him. Someone would have to die. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves to give humanity a chance. "I need a volunteer," he said to Maria, "someone willing to connect their mind to the enemy." "Sir, you are asking someone to commit suicide." "I know." To everyone's surprise, it was Grant who stepped forward. The young scientist had been aboard the Unconquerable, helping to coordinate the weapon systems. He was only 28 years old with his whole life ahead of him, but his eyes were calm and certain. "I have studied the owl more than almost anyone," said. "I understand how they think, how they move, how they feel. If someone needs to get inside their minds, it should be me." Daniel wanted to say no. He wanted to find another way, any other way. But there was no time, and he could see that had already made his choice. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked. Smiled, and it was a peaceful smile, the smile of someone who had found his purpose. "Admiral, I grew up reading stories about heroes who gave everything to save the world. I never thought I would get the chance to be one of them. Please let me do this." The plan was simple but dangerous. The main fleet would attack with everything they had left, creating chaos and drawing the attention of the owl. While this was happening, a small group of ships would slip through the confusion and take close to the Queen. When they got near enough, would create the dimensional anchor. The moment the anchor was active, the ships would fire every weapon they had at the exposed Queen. 12 ships volunteered for the mission. Captain Maria Santos would lead them aboard the Endurance. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell and her remaining fighters would provide protection. Dr. Bell came aboard personally to set up the equipment would need. As settled into the special chamber that had been built for him, surrounded by machines and wires, made the final adjustments. "Once you connect to the owl mind, you will have about 3 minutes before the strain kills you," she explained, her voice gentle. "You need to hold the anchor stable for at least 90 seconds. Can you do that?" Looked at her with clear eyes. "I can do it, I will do it." Put her hand on his. "You are the bravest person I have ever known." As the strike force prepared to launch, Admiral Price sent one final message too. "What you are doing will never be forgotten. Your name will be remembered as long as humans exist." Smiled through the screen. "Just make sure we win, Admiral. That is all the thanks I need." The 12 ships launched into the darkness, flying toward the heart of the owl swarm. Behind them, the rest of the human fleet prepared for one final, desperate attack. The fate of humanity now rested on the shoulders of one young man who had chosen to give everything for his people. The 12 ships of the strike force flew through space like shadows moving through darkness. Captain Maria Santos stood at the helm of the Endurance, her hands steady on the controls. Around her, the other 11 ships followed in tight formation. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell and her fighters flew alongside them, ready to destroy any owl that got too close. Behind them, Admiral Daniel Price led the main fleet in the largest attack of the entire war. Every remaining ship, every last weapon, everything humanity had left was thrown at the owl swarm. Explosions lit up the darkness as thousands of human vessels crashed against millions of enemy creatures. "Give them everything," Daniel roared over the communication channel. "Make them remember this day forever." The plan was working. The owl turned their attention to the main fleet, not noticing the small group of ships slipping through the chaos. Sarah and her fighters destroyed any scouts that came near, clearing a path through the swarm. Inside his special chamber aboard the Endurance, Grant sat surrounded by machines. Wires connected his head to the frequency equipment. Dr. Bell stood nearby, watching the screens that showed his vital signs. "We are getting close," Maria announced from the bridge. 2 minutes until we reach the Queen." Took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He thought about Earth, about the small town where he had grown up. He remembered the smell of his mother's cooking, the sound of his father's laugh, the feeling of grass under his bare feet on summer days. He held onto those memories tightly. They would be his anchor, his protection against the darkness he was about to enter. "Beginning the connection now," said, and she activated the equipment. Suddenly, was not alone in his mind anymore. The owl consciousness was huge beyond understanding. It was like an ocean of hunger and hatred, dark and cold and endless. Millions of years of destruction pressed against his thoughts, trying to crush him, trying to swallow him whole. He felt the minds of billions of owl creatures, all of them hungry, all of them wanting to consume everything that lived. But did not break. He held onto his memories of Earth, his memories of the people he loved, his memories of everything good and beautiful in the universe. The owl pushed against him, and he pushed back. "I see you," whispered, his voice echoing through the mental connection. "And now you see me." He showed them humanity. He opened his mind and let them see everything humans were. He showed them the joy of a child taking her first steps. He showed them the love between two people who had grown old together. He showed them the courage of ordinary people who stood up against impossible odds. He showed them hope. The owl had consumed many species. They had absorbed knowledge and power and memories from 1,000 civilizations. But they had never encountered anything like this. They had never encountered a species that could look into the darkness and refuse to be afraid. "Now," screamed, his voice reaching across the communication channel to every ship in the strike force. Activated the dimensional anchor. Reality itself seemed to twist and bend around the Owl Queen. For just a moment, the massive creature became completely solid, completely vulnerable. The strike force fired everything they had. Missiles and energy beams and frequency weapons all struck the Queen at the same moment. The explosion that followed was the thing anyone had ever seen. It was visible across the entire solar system, a new star being born in the darkness. Through the owl hive mind, the death of the Queen spread like a shockwave. Every creature in the swarm felt it. Billions of owls screamed with one voice as the connection that bound them together was torn apart. And then they were gone. The swarm collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The darkness that had covered the stars pulled back and vanished. The owl that survived fled back toward the dimensional barrier, broken and confused, no longer the unstoppable force they had been. Admiral Daniel Price watched them go from the bridge of the unconquerable. Tears ran down his face, but he did not try to hide them. Around him, the surviving crews of the human fleet were cheering and crying and holding each other. "We did it," Maria's voice came over the communication channel from the Endurance. Her voice was shaking. "Admiral, we actually did it." "What about?" Daniel asked, already knowing the answer. There was a long pause. "He is gone, sir, but Dr. Bell says he was smiling at the end. He knew we had one." The price of victory had been terrible. Of the 3,000 ships that had joined the Resistance fleet, fewer than 800 remained. Millions of humans had died defending their home, but Earth still stood. Humanity still lived. In the days that followed, the other species of the galaxy began to emerge from hiding. They had watched the battle from far away, expecting to see humanity destroyed like all the others. Instead, they saw something that had never happened before. They saw the owl defeated. The Galactic Confederation was rebuilt, and this time humans took a leading role. The young species that had barely joined the stars had proven themselves to be the strongest of all. Other species came to Earth to learn from them, to understand how they had done the impossible. Dr. Bell was given every award and honor that existed, but she always said that the credit belonged to the people who had worked beside her, especially Grant. She spent the rest of her life teaching young scientists, making sure that his sacrifice would never be forgotten. Admiral Daniel Price retired to a small farm in Montana, in the mountains where he had grown up. He spent his remaining years writing about the war and teaching young officers who came from all over the galaxy to learn from the man who had held the line. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell became a legend among pilots. She led the rebuilt human fleet for another 30 years, training a new generation of warriors who would protect the peace that had been won with so much blood. Ambassador has stayed on Earth until his death, many years later. He said that being among humans gave him hope for the future. Before he died, he told a young child a story about a dark time when the stars themselves seemed to be going out, and how a brave species had refused to let the light die. But it was Grant who became the greatest symbol of humanity's triumph. On every colony world, in every station and settlement, his statue stood as a reminder of what one person could do when they refused to give up. Children were named after him. Songs were written about him. His story was told around campfires and in classrooms and in temples and in homes all across the galaxy. At the base of every statue, the same words were written. "Here stands a human. He looked into the darkness and was not afraid." Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The owl never returned. The dimensional barrier was strengthened and guarded, watched by ships from 100 different species working together. The galaxy entered a new age of peace and cooperation, with humanity at its heart. And on quiet nights, when the stars were bright and the wind was still, old people would look up at the sky and remember. They would remember the time when darkness came for everything they loved. They would remember the brave men and women who stood against it. And they would remember that humanity held the line.